Hello, thank you for joining me. Today I wanted to address the topic of shame, but more specifically, I want to talk about being shamed. It's a heavy one. It's a big topic, and I think that most of us at some stage in our lives have been shamed or have been on the receiving end of someone else shaming us. I know I certainly have. And the thing about shame is that it is a very heavy emotion. Shame sits like cement, and it can burden us and it can weigh us down. And without knowing it, carrying shame around with us from whatever instance or whatever experience shame came from, or being shamed, it can really, really weigh us down. And what's more, is that shame can wreak havoc on our self-esteems. But is it possible to look at shame from a different perspective? Is it possible that on the other end of shame, or on the other side of shame, we can find and experience glory and peace and perhaps empathy? So allow me to share a story with you. It's a personal experience of mine. So a few nights ago, as I was falling asleep and I was praying, because I pray at night. Well, I pray all day long, but specifically at night I have quiet time. And just before I fell asleep, this memory popped up into my mind of being shamed when I was in school. So here goes. But what I want to also say is that when this memory popped up, the same emotions of embarrassment and shame came up again, as if it happened yesterday. So here's the story. When I was in grade 9, standard 7, I shared a class with the grade 12 students, the matric students. I was having like a break class. And this class was taken by my favorite teacher, who I adored. I mean, she was lovely and kind and supportive. She was wonderful. Anyway, the bell rang, and we were all supposed to sit down when the bell rang, and for whatever reason, I didn't quite know where to sit. So I didn't immediately sit down. I sort of was kind of feeling where I wanted to sit. It was a bit strange. But what happened is the teacher lost her rag with me. She lost it. And she shouted at me, and she belittled me, and she embarrassed me. She basically publicly shamed me for about 10 minutes. Anyway, I was mortified, as you can imagine, and I spent the rest of the class with my head on my arm, sleeping, just wanting the floor to swallow me, and it was an awful experience. And as that memory came up, I thought, why did that have to happen? I mean, was this necessary? Why did that situation have to happen? And feeling the same feelings of shame when this memory popped up a few nights ago, 15 years later, the fact that all those old feelings, was rising up again in me, made me feel so uncomfortable, and I still felt that embarrassment. And I said, Lord, help me to see this from your perspective. Why did this have to happen? Show me from your perspective. Anyway, went to sleep. Next morning, I was putting petrol in, and I was irritable, shame, with the petrol guard because I was having an off day. And as I was driving to work, it slowly dawned on me. I realized that teacher was having an off day, and I caught her at the wrong time, in the wrong moments, and it was, the straw that broke the camel's back, and me not listening and being obedient in that moment. It was obviously, was too much for her, already having a bad day, and she yelled at me and she screamed at me. But here's the thing. Looking back at it now, it actually had nothing to do with me. Had very little to do with me. She was reacting because she was already having a bad day. And you know what happened? I gained perspective. All these years later, I realized that she was just having a bad day. And you know what happened? I felt peace in my heart. That shame and that embarrassment lifted, and it was replaced with some perspective. and I felt healed. So what am I saying to you? What I'm saying is, oftentimes when we feel like someone is shaming us, it helps to try and see it from a different perspective. And it is particularly helpful when we ask God to show us that person from His perspective. And more often than not, I'll put my head on a block and say this to you, that shaming feeling that you're feeling will be replaced with compassion, even sympathy, possibly empathy. And your lens will change. And you will realize that quite possibly the person who shamed you was reacting from something. And it's their own stuff. It actually has very little to do with you. So the blessing is that we are never alone, and that we are feeling embarrassed or shamed, or a situation has made us feel, has made us feel like we're not good enough. The absolute blessing is that we can go on our knees and ask God to show us that person or that situation that shamed us from His perspective. And I'm very near on a promise here that it will change your lens and your perspective. And what will happen as a result is your heart will heal, you will feel lighter, and you will feel like the burden has been lifted off you. Because remember, when we ask God to show us from His perspective is the truth. And also remembering that God is a God of love, and therefore the perspective that you will gain will make you feel lighter, possibly even healed, and that you will feel like you can put that in perspective, shelve it, and move on with your life. So there we have it. All we need to do is ask for a different perspective and come at the situation with compassion and a bit of empathy. Because the truth of the matter is we're all human. We all have off days. We all have off moments. I know I do. And when we can see a situation and look at it from different eyes outside of our own stuff, then perhaps we can gain a wonderfully new perspective with the help of a loving Father, because we are never alone. There is always help, and there's always context. I hope this was helpful to you. Thank you for tuning in with me, and please join me next week as I discuss choices. One more thing, I want to just suggest, if I may, that we read Philippians 4 verse 6 to 7 and get that in our spirit. And when we get God and the Holy Spirit in our spirit, then we can come at the world and situations and memories from a place of love, but more importantly, from a place of peace. Right, kids, have a good week. God bless you, and I'll see you next Sunday.